The primary reason that people should consider hyperconverged secondary storage is that if you're taking and keeping backups, full backups every week, and start storing maybe 4 or 8 full copies, then that starts to use up an awful lot of disk space. There are some calculators available online that you can go to and calculate how much straight disk you might need in a backup environment. And they can be quite shocking how much disk is actually required. A lot of our prospects underestimate what they need. If you start to deduplicate that and start to head up towards 8 to 12, maybe 16 weeks of retention, you can start seeing dedupe rates of 15 or 20 to 1. Now, that is highly dependent on the data set, how good it is for deduping, and what the retention policy is. But that's a typical rate we'll see with customers. Now, with that, you've got less space consumed, less power, less cooling, less management time as well. This is a very easy solution, for example, to roll out. And then also, if you want to copy the data off-site, now, for example, Veeam have a rule called the 3-to-1 rule. And that means that you should have 3 copies of your data on 2 different sites, on 2 different architectures, and one of those copies goes to a different site. So you should have a copy off-site so that if you do, in the worst case scenario, lose a building or a data center, there's another copy somewhere else far enough away that it's not impacted by that disaster. Now, if you've already deduplicated at the primary backup site, then the amount of bandwidth you require to replicate will be a lot lower than if you're trying to replicate backups. And then there's 3 key points that not a lot of people actually consider when they're thinking about dedupe and backup storage. So the first one is a fast ingest and a short backup window. So these days there are some backup technologies that are able to take storage level snapshots, and many of them take VMware level snapshots as backups, and that creates a lot of data very quickly. So the best idea is to write that down to disk very quickly. So how do you do that, and how do you keep the backup window nice and short so it doesn't impact the next working day? And now some of the technologies, such as Veeam, for example, can do instant restore of your virtual machines. That can recover a virtual machine in a couple of minutes by mounting the backup file. Now, if you've deduplicated the data, you may have a month's worth of history, and that image that you're trying to recover may be spread across a month, or longer. So being able to stitch that together and recover is a very important factor. And then finally, keeping a fixed length backup window. So a lot of the backup technologies are now scale out. So that means as your backup grows, you start adding extra resources to deal with more and more data in terms of the backup engine. But how do you then scale out your backup infrastructure, the disk that you're targeting to, in a like-minded way? Because a lot of architecture these days at the secondary storage level is inline scale up. So you buy an appliance, you keep adding trays of disk to it, but now that doesn't allow you to keep a fixed length backup window. So if we look at those types of appliances, here on the left-hand side, you can see a backup server is pushing data down to the disk, and it's going through the inline dedupe stage. So this is what Data Domain and HP Store 1, for example, do. Now, the problem with carrying out that compute stack as part of the backup chain, where you look at the data, you create checksums, you see if they pre-exist, you put them into the right area of the disk, and then compress, that's going to slow down your backup flow and create a longer backup window as a result. And also what happens then, all your data is stored in a dedupe form, so the recovery process becomes really slow. You've got to stitch it all back together. Like I said, if your image is spread across a month or 2 months worth of history, there's an awful lot of work and compute to be done to recover machines. And if you needed to push to tape, there was a discussion a few years ago that tape was dead, but certainly now with ransomware and other problems and laws that come into place, a lot of people are deciding to still keep tape. Now, if you're trying to push data from a dedupe image to tape, you have to do a full rehydrate first, and that means that your disk can be consumed in the recovery process, the restore process, and too busy to actually be able to spare a lot of resource for backups. And then also with these systems, you might buy a compute shelf and a tray or 2 of disks, and as your backup data grows, you keep adding trays of disks. Now that can be expensive because the vendor might have you locked into their product and can start putting the price up, but also what happens is you eventually fill up that appliance and then you have to go and buy a bigger one to be able to manage your growing backup data, and that can be a very costly forklift upgrade, and you're not adding any resources to deal with the bigger and bigger backup apart from more storage. So you're not able to back up any quicker. In fact, the backup window starts to grow and grow. So why are we different at ExaGrid? We have a different architecture, as mentioned right at the beginning. We actually split our appliance in half. So the half of the appliance is straight disk. There's nothing too clever about what that is. It's just a straight portion of straight disk that the backups are targeted to. So that means that we're not interfering with the backup flow. The backup product writes down as quickly as it was intended to disk. So we're avoiding that compute-intensive dedupe stage that a lot of other vendors use. But what then happens is as the backups do start to land, we kick into a process called adaptive dedupe, which allows us to deduplicate locally onto the second half of the appliance into a dedupe portion. But also, because we're doing the compute at that point of looking to see what doesn't exist before or what might exist already, that copies any new data offsite to the DR site if you want to replicate. So it's very quick, and it gets the data offsite as intended very quickly as well. The really key part of what the landing zone affords to ExaGrid customers is a portion of disk that allows you to recover very, very quickly. So we typically size a landing zone to keep a week's worth of data in it, so one full and obviously a handful of incrementals as well. And that means that from 97-98% of urgent restores that a customer might need, they will come from that landing zone portion and they will recover as quickly as the backup product intended in the first place. There's no rehydration phase for that most recent week's worth of data. Anything beyond a week is also in the retention zone, the repository, the dedupe portion. So that will take slightly longer to restore, but the benefit is it's older data. Typically, it doesn't need to be restored quickly, and you have a great dedupe ratio. So there's a cost effectiveness of keeping that data down there instead of the landing zone. So effectively, you're getting the best of both worlds. It's a bit of a hybrid approach to backup. So your restores are very quick. Tape copies, if they're done in the first week, are very quick from the fully hydrated data. And VM boots, such as Veeam's Instant Restore, work very nicely, thank you very much, from that portion. So the fixed length backup window is really important as well. I've seen many occasions, having worked in this sector for 18 years, where customers' backup windows are starting to get broken. So if you have a scale-up architecture on the left-hand side, that's what's going to happen. You have a single front-end controller, a tray of disks, you're backing up at X terabytes an hour. And it doesn't matter how many extra trays of disks you throw into the mix, you're not adding any more compute until that appliance is full. You do a forklift upgrade. So you're stuck at that ingest rate of X terabytes an hour. Whereas on the right-hand side, with a scale-out architecture, we're able to right-size a solution, in this case for 40 terabytes of backup, put in the amount of compute, it backs up X terabytes an hour. When the customer grows to 80 terabytes, they can put another appliance in that's the same as the first one, and that means they've doubled their compute. So they've doubled the size of the backup, they've doubled their compute. It doesn't take a genius to work out that the backup speed stays the same. Now that's all the way up to 25 appliances in a grid currently, and that may be changing very soon. So you can grow to 25 times quicker than you were doing it originally as the backup grows to 25 times bigger than it was. This is a great solution for customers who don't know how fast they're going to be growing. They don't need to right size for years in advance. But also if companies that are having mergers and acquisitions, or there's a new project happening, there's more data to add to the pool, they're able to slot in some appliances to handle that, knowing that the backup window is going to stay pretty static. So if you then put that into a graph form against one of our competitors, you can see the ingest rate on the y-axis, the size of the backup on the x-axis. We have 25 small steps, almost a straight line, the green triangle, versus trying to put in big appliances and just adding trays of disks. You're not adding any more compute. And as we start getting into the really big backups, there's a big performance increase from using ExaGrid. So these are the appliances we sell into the market at the moment. They range from the ability in the middle numerical column, the capacity for weekly fulls, from 3 terabytes all the way up to 40 terabytes of weekly full backup per week. That's a very easy way of us sizing. So if you know the size of your backup, you can take a very good stab at what size of appliance is needed. So yes, from 3 terabytes to 40 terabytes, we can mix and match in the architecture. So a customer can quite easily have a 40,000 running with a 21,000, making a total 61 terabytes weekly full. for example. Now, each appliance is by default about 50-50 in terms of the architecture. So 50% is landing zone, 50% is dedupe zone, but we can move that. So some customers may be more landing zone heavy because they have big backups and short retention. Some may be the other way around, where they have a long retention policy, so they have a smaller percentage of the architecture assigned to the landing zone compared to the repository. Now, if you want to look at the right-hand column, that's the throughput, and you can see in the 40 terabyte unit, 40 terabytes of backup at 8 terabytes an hour. 40 divided by 8 is 5 hours, and if you do the math for all of the appliances, it's around about 5 hours. So that means that it doesn't matter what is in a grid, as long as the backup product and the network can push the data at the ExaGrid architecture quick enough, we know that we can ingest and restore in about 5 hours. Now, we used to sell a 1,000, a 2,000, and a 4,000 at the smaller end. We don't sell them anymore, and I'll touch on this again later, but we do still fully support them. So anybody that bought some of our earlier equipment is still fully supported at this time. The architecture, the software, the firmware is very well baked, and we can still put the latest software onto the oldest equipment. And due to the way that we scale out, that's not a problem in terms of obsolescence, and it's still a 5-hour backup window, whatever is in the grid. It's possible to replicate. Now, the good news is that there is no software licensing involved in this. If a customer owns 2 appliances, they can replicate. And it's very automatic as well. A customer creates a backup share and then selects to replicate that off-site. It's as simple as that to set it up. It's a couple of minutes of work, if that, a couple of clicks on a mouse. And in terms of where you want to replicate to, you can replicate off to a second private cloud data center that you may possess. You can replicate away to a hosting or colo facility from one of our partners. Maybe Servnet can offer that. Hybrid cloud, some of our partners actually buy the appliances and rent them back on an OpEx model to the customers. Again, that's a potential for Servnet there. And then public cloud. So if a customer owns a physical unit in their primary data center, it is possible to replicate to effectively a virtual unit in the Amazon cloud and dumps the data into S3. So it's a nice cost-effective way of putting your data into cloud storage in terms of putting it there and forgetting about it. Obviously, then it's possible to pull the data back should you need to. So it's very efficient on the network. It's only data that's not been seen before that's sent across the DR side. It can be throttled, encrypted, and scheduled. And even better, the disaster recovery site can be configured as all repository to save cost. So that means that if a customer has an EX10000 at the primary site, they can put a 5000 into the DR site and make that all repository, no landing zone, to match the repository at the primary site, because we're only replicating the repository. So the DR side is typically half the size of the primary site. So here are all the vendors that we work with. So it's not just Veeam. We support all the major players. So there's Veritas, Backup Exec and Net Backup, Commvault's on there, HP as well, and ArcServe and Acronis. And really important to mention Oracle and SQL, because I know that the Servnet messaging included talking about that. So we do have the ability to ingest directly from those databases. So they have tools built into them that dump the backups to disk on a scheduled basis, and they can be targeted directly onto the ExaGrid appliance. And if you're doing a full dump every night, you see some brilliant DU rates over time. So one of our customers, a law firm in London, keeps 3 months worth of data for their SQL dumps, and they're getting over 100 to 1 as a dedupe rate because the databases do dedupe very nicely and compress nicely onto the appliances, gives them a fantastic rate on that. Typically, DBAs can be the sort of people that like to control their own destiny, like to be able to dump the data themselves rather than use somebody in another team to do it. So this affords them the ability to do that very well and keeps them happy. Just a couple of slides on our integration with Veeam. We actually have some Veeam code built into our appliances called a data mover. And effectively, that's a second Veeam proxy. And what that means is that the transport protocol from the primary proxy down to the appliance isn't using CIFS or NFS in this case. Normally with a share, obviously you're targeting it to a CIFS or NFS share. With the Veeam data mover, you're targeting a Veeam share on the appliance. So the protocol's Veeam. The share is not publicly available on the network for anything, particularly like a ransomware worm, to find. So the only way to see the backups is through the Veeam GUI. It adds an extra level of security. So we've had some great interest from NHS trusts recently, for some reason, around this feature. There's a logical air gap created with this technology. But also, because we're not using something like CIFS, it's much, much quicker. So it's about 30% faster to ingest, and it increases the instant restore speed there as well. So there's a number of great benefits from using that. Also, it increases the synthetic backup speed because the proxy doesn't need to do the work this time. We have that second proxy on the appliance, the data mover, so everything happens inside the appliance, and that means that synthetic tools are about 6 times quicker than they would be using just a proxy to do the work. Another feature with Veeam is the integration with the SOBA technology in Veeam, so Scale Out Backup Repository. So Veeam released this so that you could take different shares on different bits of disk spread across your architecture and effectively turn that into one logical super share. And we've worked with them to allow customers to do that with our appliances. So that means that instead of a share on every appliance being targeted by Veeam with different backup jobs, what that means is that a single share is created across all the appliances, so it becomes a super share. So today, that means that you can have a 1 petabyte share spread across 25 of those 40 terabyte units. So it does make life very easy for Veeam customers to be able to keep creating or extending their share once they've started one, rather than having to manage and use lots of different shares. We can do that with Oracle as well. It's the same, effectively, technology at the back end. So any customers with great big Oracle shares can do the same thing. So what's in the box? It's a RAID 6 disk array with a hot spare, so you can guard against multiple failures at the same time, should they ever happen. You know, that very low chance. Redundant power supplies. The appliances come with 4 1-gig NICs. The bigger ones come with the 10-gig ports as well. And we can put 40 gig in if required. And in terms of the disks, there are 2 flavors. They can either be just normal disks or they can be encrypted at rest. And that adds obviously an extra level of security. Great in public sector, NHS or legal, and some finance customers use it as well. And because it's the disk drives that are encrypted, there's no impact on the backup performance either. And we mentioned already that you can encrypt the web replication on the WAN if anybody's copying from one site to another. We have a fantastic support model. Anybody who's familiar with Pure, for example, might be familiar with the concept of not dealing with level 1. Each of our customers is assigned to a support engineer, so that means that you get to know your support rep. These guys are experts. They've been trained on the different backup apps. I've happened to know some of them for a very, very long time. They've been working support for a long time. And they're there not just as a support rep, that somebody, when something goes wrong, which obviously isn't very often, but they're there as a post-sales resource for our customers as well. So our customers are able to pick up the phone or drop them an email directly to that rep and talk to them about configurations and making changes to the backups, for example. So they're very handy for that. And they do the installs as well. So there's no install professional service cost. Customers simply have a WebEx session with the support rep. It takes about an hour for an appliance to be installed remotely by the support rep. So there's very easy for our customers to get the kit in and maybe replace some old cheap disk. Just literally repoint the backup job to the appliance. Really, really easy. We do have a lot of support software releases because we support 28 different applications. But because we know what backup apps our customers are using, when something useful is released, we can give a customer a prompt and say, now's a good time to update. We don't have to keep updating all the time. Just maybe a couple of times a year. It's very simple. Download a file, put it onto the box, give it a quick reboot, and you're done. So I mentioned already with the replication that there's no licensing for it. It's just built in. And that's all things There's no different tiers of availability of different products or features within the ExaGrid architecture. If a customer buys ExaGrid appliances, they get everything that we can do from the off, so you don't need to worry about software licensing there. Obviously, there's support and maintenance as normal. As long as a customer has support and maintenance, they have all the features and all the support that they'd expect. We have Cool Home as well, as you might expect from an enterprise-friendly product, so that we can be monitoring for customers as well as themselves with local monitoring. So it's really important to talk about some of the economic policies that we follow to assist our customers with the concept of the scale-out model. So what we see with traditional IT vendors is that they'll sell at a really low price to get a new customer, and then maybe when you go back for a couple of trays of discs, they'll start to hit you quite hard on those future purchases. Or maybe if you have to, really bad scenario where you have a forklift upgrade, there might be a big price on that. So what we do at ExaGrid is if a customer buys into the technology today, we'll lock in the price for them for the next 5 years. So if you do buy a unit today and then you come back to us in a month's time for a second unit, you know that that's going to be the same cost as what was paid the first time, and that's for 5 years. Now, obviously, prices do tend to come down, so there's a lid, shall we say, on the prices, but they do come down. So you do know, you can plan for 5 years, for example, how much it's going to cost to own this backup infrastructure. Now, in terms of maintenance, what a lot of our competition will do is start to hike the price up after a few years, and they're trying to force you to buy maybe some of their newer models because they're continuously changing the CPUs in their devices to back up more and more, faster and faster. They do need to keep releasing new models. Now, because I mentioned earlier, we don't actually make our products obsolete. So a customer can buy something today and run it for the next 8 years. And as you can see from the slide, you know that the price limit is going to be max 3% rise per year. And actually quite often it's under that. But again, that means that planning for future, for the next 5 years, for example, is locked in. So a lot of our customers buy the first year with the appliance, and then they'll keep adding maintenance year on year, knowing they're not going to get hammered somewhere down the line. And this is all written down in a document as a promise. In terms of the maintenance as well, we don't charge a percentage of the list price. So if you come through Servnet and get a great discount for end of quarter, for example, quite often you get a lovely discount from the hardware vendor. And that doesn't reflect then on the maintenance. But with ExaGrid, if you get a great deal on the appliance, you'll get a great deal on the lifetime of the maintenance for that device as well, because it's a percentage of the price you pay. We talked about why our competition need to carry out forklift upgrades once you've put in too many trays of disks with that scale up architecture. But with ExaGrid, because we are scale out, we don't need to do that. So you can effectively pay as you grow. You can maybe buy the first year up front, maybe add in 10% growth for that first year, and then pay as you grow, knowing what the price is going to be. We don't need to do any guesswork in terms of the sizing, because you can just, as I said, scale out, pay as you grow. So we don't need to throw in a very expensive processor to help you right at the beginning for the next 5 years worth of growth. We can right size it just for the first year. And in terms of obsolescence, we've covered this already. Our competition make their products obsolete and try and force you on to another newer, better device. But with us, you can run those devices for a long time. So we've recently had a customer who had 8-year-old boxes that were only 1 terabyte until last year. And we did do a swap out for them, gave them a good price for the old kit, and sold them some much bigger appliances to deal with their growing data. And finally, there's no hidden costs. So the upfront price includes the installation, all the features, replication, and even worst case, hardware replacement, should the very worst case happen, as long as obviously the support and maintenance is in place. So as a wrap-up, we have the landing zone in the appliances. It's that portion of straight disk that allows you to keep a week's worth of backup there and allows you to recover very quickly from that straight disk. The scale-out architecture actually comes from the landing zone architecture, but that means that you can pay as you grow. You can just put in as much as you need for today and then scale out as you go along. Lowest cost. Now, we don't put the latest and greatest processors in our appliances because we do the dedupe after the backups have landed. So it's a cost-effective solution. And if you're keeping 8 weeks or more in particular, then it can become cheaper than just putting lots of straight disk in. Certainly a lot easier to manage and a lot more robust as well. And then finally, our support team, we do like them very much. They get a slice of the pie at the end. Apparently 85% of our case studies talk about the support team in a favorable manner. So it's worth talking about. Working with us is very easy, in particular because of that support team. So that's the end of the presentation. Nice, quick, swift one. So hopefully you got some good information from that. And as Balan said at the beginning, I'm happy to answer any questions if somebody's got one for me, or obviously feel free to go through Servnet as well with any questions if you don't want to speak publicly. So thank you very much for your time. Balan, anything else to add?
No, thank you very much for that, Chris. Does anyone have any questions? What Chris has managed to do is he's also managed to do a recording of today's presentation. So this was for some people who would have wanted to attend the WebEx today but were unable to. So we will be sending these out to you as well in case you want to share internally. But I will be following up with those who have managed to join the WebEx today over the next few days just to get some feedback and your thoughts. If you do have any questions, please feel free to email them to me. We can always engage with ExaGrid to have a further conversation. If you have a unique environment or something like that that you wanted to have a little bit more of an in-depth conversation about, we're more than willing to do so. But otherwise, that's all I have from my end, unless anyone else has any questions. Okay, no, I take that as a no. But again, by all means, feel free to drop me an email. You should have my contact details, and hopefully we will speak to you in the next few days. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Balan. Cheers.
All right, cheers. Thanks. Bye.